I right there with you. Oh my gosh.
You guys may be a
Lawrence
close
is-
second, but we're still winning.
Yeah, Lawrence is very good at handling whatever conversations happen. So you're in good hands with him as the moderator.
Thank you.
Wow.
So are you currently in Oklahoma, Tracy, or are you elsewhere today?
No, I am in my office,
Okay.
and we are getting ready to have Cherokee National Holiday this weekend. So I
Interesting.
am getting to be choir mom because Carlos has joined the Cherokee National Youth Choir. And so tonight they're singing at the Chiefs banquet. Tomorrow night's a concert. Saturday they're singing during the Chiefs State of the Nation address. We got lots of stuff going on, but he is really enjoying himself. So
Wow, if any of that's recorded, I'd love to see it. Or if you can
I
post
will
it on
I will see
Facebook.
if there are clips. Yeah, I can send you.
Okay, how old is he right now?
12.
Oh my goodness.
Much
Tracy.
taller than his mother, almost as tall as
Wow.
his dad. He will definitely bypass Mark very soon. It's a little unnerving.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
he is
gosh.
back in school though this fall at the Cherokee Nation Immersion School, and they require masking. So I was like, oh, you can go back to in-person school. We'll go there. That's great.
Uh-huh.
But of course, nowhere else is masking here. But yeah, no, he's having a great time. He's having a great
Great.
time.
And please tell Mark hi for me too.
I will. I will. I will.
Well, I think we're kind of getting, all of our little hellos out of the way here, Lawrence.
Yeah,
Hey, do you want?
We're
Yeah,
about
I was gonna
ready.
say, I want
Would you like me
pictures of all
to-
the grandkids, and when I get out there, I need to see updates because it's been a long time and they have got to be running around and wreaking all kinds of havoc at this point. So yeah.
Moses turns
I think-
4 at the end of this month.
I think we can get started. I think it's 10:30.
I'm gonna let people in and then I'll send you guys
Sounds
to
good.
Facebook Live as well.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
Here we go. Well, welcome everybody. You're tuned into Brainstorming the Human Connection with South Dakota Humanities Council. And I want to welcome all of you today. We're going to be talking about books, children's books, and more specifically, Native, let's say, contributions to children's books and children's books for Native children. That's for Native children and by people who have some kind of insight into what those children need to, let's say, support their growth. With us is a person who has done a lot to push that narrative forward and to push the idea of having Native people involved with developing books for Native children, Traci Sorell. Did I say that right?
It's
Sorell?
Sorell. Yeah.
Sorell. When I said it, I thought, wait, did you tell me Sorell or Sorell?
Yeah.
Sorell or Sorell? Yeah. Sorell. Okay,
It's all
so
good.
I like to
All
get
good.
it right because
Yes.
it's easy, just as easy to get it right as to get it wrong.
There you go. Absolutely.
So may as well do it
Absolutely.
right. So welcome, Tracy. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to get started. And I like to get started by getting to know you and letting the rest of our esteemed panel here know a little bit more about you. Let's start with, where you're born, how you developed to be the Tracy that you are.
Oh, well, no, thank you, Lawrence. And welcome to everyone who's joined us. I'm delighted to have this time with you. Traci Sorell, Dagwadoa, Jijalagi, Digo-Eliski. I am Traci Sorell. I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen, and I'm coming to you live from the Cherokee Nation Reservation, located in what is now northeastern Oklahoma, but at the time it was formed was part of Indian Territory. My ancestors were forcibly removed here from our southeastern homelands. And I write books for young people, fiction and nonfiction, from birth to age 18. I was one of those children that loved reading fiction and nonfiction, so I enjoy writing that, and in a variety of formats. So I write prose and poetry. I was born in Claremore, Oklahoma, just a little north of Tulsa, if you're familiar with what we call green country, or the northeastern corner of Oklahoma, and grew up in various small towns in northeastern Oklahoma until after my parents divorced. And then they had both remarried, my mom and stepdad. At the time, we moved out to San Diego, where my stepdad had relatives. And so I spent my high school years out there, and then went on to college, first generation college graduate at UC Berkeley, studying Native Studies with a minor in ethnic studies. Did graduate work, got a master's at the University of Arizona, and focused in federal Indian law and policy, and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Practiced federal Indian law, working with tribes and their tribal courts, and then did policy work on a national level in Washington, D.C. for a national Native nonprofit, and then ran a national Native nonprofit out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Finally found time for a personal life. Got married, and when my son was born, I started looking at books written that featured Native nations, their citizens, and found that overwhelmingly those books were traditional stories that sometimes were written by Native people and illustrated by them, but most often were written by non-Native, principally white authors, and illustrated by white illustrators when I looked at the who the creators were. And those stories were retellings or adaptations that really didn't adhere to what the traditional stories were. And I started to think, well, okay, but where are the stories now? You know, where are the stories like that have moved forward from traditional stories? And so, you know, I was looking at historical stuff, not just contemporary, and found some things, of course, but again, not a lot written by Native writers and illustrators. And I thought, well, we have so many wonderful artists and so many writers across, you know, over 570 Native nations. So I contacted a friend of mine from graduate school in Arizona, who's now a professor of folklore and English. And I said, you know, you've written books for young people, you've written books for adults. If I wanted to write something for young people, how would I go about that? And he was very generous, giving me advice on kind of how to connect with different, what we call kidlit organizations and people, and how to kind of prepare a manuscript. And so I started down that path, and it's been life-changing is a really easy way to say it, because it has brought me into a brand new community of people. Like I say, I've worked with Native people my entire life, you know, in a variety of capacities. And so I'm still working with a lot of Native people, even though the trade publishing industry that my books are published by, like Penguin Random House, you know, Charles Bridge, Lee and Low, Lerner, those are, you know, predominantly, of course, white-owned, white-run companies. But you know, my books are by and large illustrated by Native illustrators. There are more people coming into the industry to work, you know, as editors and editorial assistants and things, in marketing and sales. So it's an exciting time that way, but we have lots of work to do, because our population, if you look at the 2020 census, people under the age of 30 in the United States are majority non-white. That is even more so for those 18 and under, which is the population that I write for. Unfortunately, if that you also look at our curriculum across the country, whether you're going to a private or public school, the kids are pretty much having the same curriculum related to Native people that they had when we were all in school. So that's disturbing, right? Because we have a lot of information that's readily available to be, you know, integrated into things that were, you know, excluded previously. And trade books really are that supplement. So that's what fueled me to start writing, you know, some more recent historical, but then also contemporary views of Native people, and to put that out in fiction and nonfiction, to not just show Native children, whether they're Cherokee, you know, my tribe or others, but also children from other, backgrounds, that if you live in this country, you should be an informed community member. You should know that we're still here. You should know that we have been a part of this, land since before there was ever a thought of anyone sailing from anywhere and coming over and claiming any sort of lands, but that we're very much here today and in your communities, as your neighbors, as your classmates, as your friends. So that's kind of what has led me to be Traci Sorell, children's literature aficionado, reader, and more recently, writer and published author.
Good. You talked about the increase. I understand it's kind of like the increase in the last 5 or so years. Can you get under the hood a little bit about what kind of motivation or what things motivated the new interest, relatively new interest in bringing those books forward? Because the stories have been there, the people have been there, but now something changed that people are interested. What would you attribute that to?
Well, again, part of it is the demographics, right? So young readers simply are not majority white anymore. That's not the population. And so for publishers, what do you have to offer them that reflects who they are and who their peer base is? And they're still far behind, right? Not even 35% of books for young people from birth to 18 feature and are centered around people that aren't white, characters that aren't white. So there's that part of it. The other part of it is, people are saying, why are other people always telling our stories? We have very gifted people from our communities that are storytellers, that are artists. And I'm not talking about just Native people there. I'm talking about all, other communities. So why aren't you hearing from them? Why is this being filtered through groups that do not have firsthand knowledge, do not have connections to our communities? And then, of course, from fellow writers and artists themselves who have been in the industry for a while, right? Who saw the multicultural, surge in the 90s. And then that kind of, was a trend that went by the wayside. And people have said, oh, well, do you think this is just a trend that's going to go by the wayside? No, again, because of demographics. It's simply, I certainly pray we don't have a wholesale genocide of any group in this country. But barring that, this is our reality right now and moving forward. And so people are in this business and in trade publishing anyway to make money. And if you're going to make money, then you need to be providing, reading content that, who the population is wants to read. So I really think it's on their side, seeing that they don't have enough material for the people that are their readers. On the other side of it is, like I say, the people providing that content themselves, the artists and the writers saying, hey, we have the ability to do this. And how can we access, providing our content equitably within this industry. So I did not know the majority of the other Native people who, I now publish alongside, whether that's the illustrators or the authors. So it's almost like there's like this group think swell collective going on that we did not know about each other. Now, that said, I definitely felt like it's important to really kind of keep recruiting people and to nurture them and help them know about opportunities within the industry. So and Cynthia Leidig Smith, who has been in the industry since the late 90s, she has done a lot of this work and laid that groundwork for many, many people because she has experience as a published author and she's taught in an MFA program for children's literature. So what I feel like I'm doing is kind of building on that and letting folks know about mentorship opportunities and really helping people get connected to editors, get connected to ways to help, nurture their craft, etc. Because if you the more information you have, the easier it is to share your work with the world and also stay in the industry. You know, I don't want people just doing 1 or 2 off books. You know, if you're interested in doing this, then great, let's get you plenty of work, right? So you're doing book covers, doing lots of picture books. If you're an illustrator, if you're a writer, hey, expand your craft and write across a variety of age groups and in different formats. You know, I love doing that. But, you know, if someone wants to be the queen of funny picture books, do that too. You know, that's fine. But it's an industry that and a career path that I find that I'm constantly challenged and stretching myself. And so I really enjoy that. I don't see myself going, oh, there's nothing left to learn. There's nothing left to do, because each piece of writing in and of itself, you're starting from scratch all over again. You know, this is a brand new idea. You've got to figure out the best way to deliver the content, and writing for young people is the hardest work I've ever done. I've written congressional testimonies. I've written legal briefs for courts. Writing for young people is the most difficult, because it is such tight writing. It is for an audience that has no filter. So if they love it, they will tell you. And if they don't, they will tell you.
Exactly.
It's fantastic.
I want to take this opportunity to remind our audience and slash panel that this is an interactive format. And so when you have questions or comments, something you want to know a little bit more about, raise your hand, put something in the chat, turn off your microphone, and we'll see your or turn on your microphone, and we'll see that you have something you want to contribute, because this is an interactive program. Sharon, did you have something you wanted to say? I saw your mic off, so I just want to give you an opportunity.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I saw your mic was on, so I didn't know if you were waiting to say something or not. Okay, I guess not. So I want to go back to something you were talking about before, Native people's contributions. And as we both have said, they've been out there, but now there's this new trend toward actually getting involved. Get under the hood a little bit about what they bring. What does a person who is Native bring to the enterprise of writing a book that other people can't or won't or haven't brought before?
I think first and foremost, it is who is centering the audience, right? So when I'm sitting down to write a piece, if it's about, you know, the Cherokee nation or people, you know, children, a family, etc., you know, that's who I'm focused on. That's who I'm expecting to read the book first and foremost. And then it's like there's concentric circles outside of that. If I'm writing a book, like say We Are Still Here, which is Native American Truths Everyone Should Know, that book is an overview policy book to, in essence, answer the curriculum issue. Like what is the history in broad strokes, but an entry point for people from the end of treaty making in 1871 to the present. And so I was like, okay, how do I best tell this to those who are in upper elementary and beyond? Because the majority of adults don't even know this stuff.
Sure.
And I said to my editor, I want to do it as a picture book. And she was like, wow, that's a lot for a picture book. And I said, yes, but I think it can be done. And so I use the framework of children in a school that is Native run. Now that can be a tribal school, but in this case, it's like a public charter school that's got majority Native students, which there are many of, you know, in the United States, including one developing in Rapid City. So they are teaching, right, their classmates about these different time periods, about relocation, you know, about termination, about assimilation, etc. And it's just a matter of, if you look at other books about that, they are written almost with a sense of the white gaze. Like I'm trying to filter this for non-Native people. I'm speaking to here are the people that are featured in this book as them being centered. And so that's centering their humanity, tribal sovereignty, right? Culture and language, the full essence of the person. And that's what you see missing in a lot of books. Like, we come across as shells of human beings, as caricatures, and not in our full-bodied complexity. So I feel like when I read books that are written by other Native writers and illustrated, I see those layers. You know, I see the brushstrokes in of things that maybe not everyone else picks up, but, you know, the universal is in the specific. People can relate to things. The more specific, the more knowledge you have, the more connection. Does that mean I know everything? Does that mean everyone who works on these books knows everything? No, that's why we have connections to community. There's a whole team. You know, I call bookmaking a team sport. A lot of people help in crafting those words, in going over the pictures and sketches and stuff. And so I love that part of it, because we all understand that we're helping not just the children, but the adults around them, right? I mean, we are writing for a market that does not buy books themselves. Gatekeepers give them access to those books. That could be their family, that could be teachers, that could be librarians. And in this time of book bans, where our books are also ending up on those lists simply because it's Native created content, it's concerning, right? But we want children and young people, you know, teens, to see themselves or their peers as they fully are, and not just how we've been depicted previously in the past.
Well, that gives us a lot of angles to bounce off of. And I like to get into some examples of what you meant. That was the interesting 50,000-foot view. But I think it helps when we can get an example of what a person who's Native, how they would say something, how they would approach a book, what kind of things they would cover that might not occur to someone who's not involved with it, and or thinking about what should I be saying to children and how should I be saying it.
Right. Well, above me in this corner back here is Classified. It's a biography of Mary Golda Ross, who was the first Native woman engineer in the United States, the first female engineer, period, for Lockheed Corporation. She started out as a mathematician. And one of the things when I was talking with an editor who said, you know, she's a hidden figure, she helped put a man on the moon, her story needs to be out there. I said, okay, I don't want to write just another like women in STEM, you know, type of thing, because as I look at Mary's life and I look at what's been written about her that's in these kind of anthologies about women in STEM, I see that they mentioned her great-great-grandfather was the chief of our tribe pre, during, and post removal, forced removal from the East. I said, but no one really talks about the fact that here she is gifted in math, and she is completely encouraged to get an education from her family, you know, from the community. And all of these things, the way she's living out her life, like showcased all these Cherokee values that she is raised with, but none of that gets talked about. So I use that as the setup for the book. Okay. But it's a biography. It has to be factual. So did Mary feel that way? Did Mary feel like Cherokee values influenced her life? If I don't have evidence of that, I can't say that. Right. So thankfully, a few weeks before she passed, at age 99, which was just a few months, unfortunately, before she turned 100, so she didn't make it to 100, she did an interview with our tribal newspaper. And in it, she talked about how, you know, she was skilled in math, but also the qualities that came down to her, she said, from her Indian heritage, which is, of course, what someone would use who was born in 1908 and grew up, you know, at that time. And I was like, okay, yes. So in the book, there's we have many Cherokee values we're raised with, but there are 4 of them around humility, around working together, you know, gaining skills and abilities and sharing those with others, whatever gifts and talents you have, you use for the betterment of all, integrating those into the narrative of the story. And then including Cherokee language, you know, translations of those in our syllabary in the back and talking about that stuff. That is not something I would see in a typical children's literature book. And it's just not going to happen. My very first book, We Are Grateful, talks about the Cherokee practice of being taught to be grateful, not just for wonderful things that happen in our life, but also difficulties and struggles, because that relates to our belief in dohi, or balance, right? Not everything's going to be wonderful, not everything's horrible, but these things do happen often simultaneously, right? One wonderful thing happens by something calamitous afterwards. And but it starts in fall with Cherokee New Year and goes through the 4 seasons. And so it integrates language, culture, and events that happen in our lives. And a lot of people look at it as like, oh, it's a Thanksgiving book. I'm like, it has nothing to do with Thanksgiving. Like, we're taught to be grateful every day, every season. And, you know, it's not defined to November as Gratitude Month or Native American Heritage. It has nothing to do with that. So those are just kind of 2 easy examples, right, of ways that I don't see others, or At the Mountain's Base, which is a 111-word poem. And it really showcases a family who is waiting for their relative, who's a female pilot in a plane in battle, to come home. We don't talk about Native women serving in the military, right? And who have served, you know, prior to the United States being formed, in intertribal battles, et cetera. It's a toll on a family. It's their service, you know, where we usually talk about Native men. We'll certainly talk about the code talkers from a variety of tribes, including, you know, Navajo Nation. So those are the kinds of shining a light on things that are often invisible to others, but very visible to us in our communities, and letting, you know, not just maybe people within that community like the Cherokee Nation, but other nations or other peoples know who we are, you know, here and now. And also, you know, what has been our experiences previously, like Mary Golda Ross, you know, and the groundbreaking, trailblazing work that she did.
Well, if I'm hearing you right, that there are not only things that are relevant to Native children / Native people, but also some of these values could be useful to all of us. And this provides a low ramp, so to speak, of saying, well, maybe I'll have some of that Indian taco. Camouflaged as a moral principle.
Right. I mean, I personally like to think that like all cultures would have gratitude as a value, you know, year round and as a daily practice. Maybe that's not the case all the time, but yeah, I mean, again, I think that the more you write specifically, that's where the universal comes from. And Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who was at Ohio State University, she's a professor emerita, you know, she looked at things from through like an African-American lens and representation of children in kind of trade literature. But she talked about, you know, giving children mirrors, giving them windows to see into other experiences, and sliding doors, right, to walk through and be immersed in those experiences. And so again, I think about who's the subject of this book, right? And that's who I'm really focused on as I'm writing. And then, so maybe not everything gets explained for everyone else, you know, things in the artwork, we don't spell out everything that you see. Those who know what they're looking at. Others will see a wonderful picture and they'll gain some knowledge from that, but not everything has to be spelled out or written out. You know, you have multiple audiences. Once the book's out in the world, it's everyone else's. It's not just mine or the illustrators or the publishers anymore. And yeah, it's important to let people have their own experiences with things. But I feel like we as humans in general, you know, have some things that are specific to us, you know, and maybe our different groups or traditions that we come from. But by and large, we have a lot more in common than we do differences. And so it's wonderful for young people to be able to discover that, right? Because especially with picture books, they're written at an age, oftentimes where the entry point's about age 4. It's, you know, it's kind of the desired target, you know, among publishers. A lot of mine are written for 7 and up, especially the nonfiction ones. And that's a time where you're moving from your family being your sole focus into extending that to a peer group, right? And looking out beyond, oh, I went to so-and-so's house and they eat different foods than I do, or, oh, they have a different routine of how they operate in their lives than we do in my family. And so books are another way to extend that. You know, I mean, I would read books as a child by Judy Blume, writing about characters in New York City who were living in these very tall buildings, going up in elevators to apartments. And I couldn't fathom such a thing, because when I got in an elevator in a tall building, someone was going to the pediatrician in Tulsa. You know, no one lived in a place like that, right? I mean, how could you not have animals and grass and trees right outside your door?
Yeah. Well, some people do in apartments, you know.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, that gave me a window into a new world that did not exist in my rural Oklahoma, you know, upbringing.
Sure. Well, one of the things that one of the panelists had a question about was, you mentioned that some of the books by natives have been banned simply because they were by natives. Can you get under the hood a little bit about that? Can you give us some examples of where and how that, what pointed to that conclusion that was just because they were native, they were banned?
So earlier on, York, Pennsylvania was probably one of the biggest nationwide, you know, issues of book banning that's kind of kicked off things, where people were really paying attention to this whole kind of movement we now see state legislatures, you know, passing laws about. And they came out with this huge list of books, and they had We Are Grateful and Indian No More on that list. And I thought, have they even read these books? You know, I mean, how do you ban a book about gratitude, right? And then I started looking at the list, and I was just like, oh, okay. So it literally was like someone took a list of books that had been, you know, getting a lot of attention, winning awards, very popular reads, and put them on there. Because I was like, you know, there's nothing controversial in We Are Grateful. All right. Indian No More is set in the 1950s. It's about a young girl whose family experiences the federal government terminating their relationship with the tribe. This happened to 109 Native nations. She and her family are, you know, again, forcibly removed, right? They've become homeless now. The land's been taken, and they're moved to Los Angeles. This is based on my late friend Charlene's experience growing up as a child, and many other families in her tribe. She passed away from cancer. I ended up finishing the revisions on that book so it could be published. And so it's about that whole termination and relocation era in the 50s, right? We talk about civil rights movement. We talk about space race. We talk about the Cold War in the 1950s. We do not teach about this huge displacement of Native people from 109 Native nations across the country during this same time. And I thought, how is this book on the list, right? And like I say, then I looked at many other books, and it was clear that it was because they were written by BIPOC or LGBTQIAP+, not looking at the content at all. And so students in that case really rallied and came back and had online petitions and went out on social media and was like, you know, please help us get this overturned. And they were successful in doing so. But what we've seen since then is a doubling down. And so to the extent that Native authors are included on those lists now still occurs, but you see a huge targeting of just books, again, in general, regardless of content. I mean, from picture books to YA that are written by African-American authors or illustrators and LGBTQIAP+. And it's just abhorrent, right? Because young people now are not, thankfully, you know, and I know it's because of work done in you know, our generations and things, but young people now know who they are. They own their identities, they own their intersections. And who are we to be like trying to go backwards, right? And like deny them who they are as people, right? This is why we have all this dysfunction and division that we do now. It's like, this is the problem. Like, you can't keep people from knowing the history and learning these things, or we devolve into a society that is not at all going to maintain itself.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe there are people that want that. I don't know, but I'm excited that we are in a non-majority white, country, like that there is no majority. I would love to have us have multiple political parties, right, that had to work together like they do in other countries, right, where you have to actually talk about things. It's not a winner take all. So it's a disturbing trend to, like I say, see books targeted simply because they have been popular among young people, or they've ended up on awards list, because they're well written and illustrated, etc., because of who the creators are. And like I say, young people don't have access to books unless we provide them that access. So it's very disturbing. And I don't want people making decisions for my son or anyone else's children. You can make decisions for your own children, but you have no right to tell someone else what their child can check out from the library, what their child can read. That's just absolutely not how we operate in this country. And but I see it as a growing trend.
So it always seems to me that the way of thinking that you just outlined is always playing defense. I want to know how it can play offense. In other words, how can we flip this script so that we're not always waiting for the next surprise legislation, but what can we do to normalize the inclusion of other people, other ideas? And the whole point for me of books is to introduce these new ideas. As a person who's involved in the publishing industry, what's the plan for normalizing the kind of thinking that you're talking about?
Well, like this spring, Christina Soon-Torvant, who is a Newbery honor-winning children's lit author. She's Thai American, lives and grew up in Texas, and of course, which has seen lots of book banning efforts, including here in Oklahoma. She crafted a letter which I think it's now over 1,500 children's literature authors and illustrators signed, talking about the need for students to have access to books. And so one of the things in making that public, it was the New York Times and it's available online, is that people can share that in their local school districts and like go to those school board meetings and say, I want to make sure that students have access to this. A lot of people have been volunteering to serve on their local libraries boards or the review for challenges, so that when someone comes in to challenge a book, that they say, okay, have you read it? Great, here's paperwork to fill out, what your challenges are, and we'll review this. And so that they, can help librarians who are under attack in public libraries, as well as school librarians and teachers, because that's really where the focus is, right? And trying to say that teachers and librarians are pedophiles or grooming people to be, race baiters and haters and all this stuff, when none of that is true, but if local citizens are showing up at those school board meetings and they are, showing support for their local public libraries, that's insanely helpful. And also talking to their legislators, saying like, what are you doing? We need a literate society. We need things that connect us more than divide us. And I want to know that as my elected official, you're on the side of that, right?
Well, it occurred to me that one of the things that we're missing from these kind of interactions is responsibility for what one says. A lot of these things that they're written in secret, sometimes anonymous. And to me, if you're not willing to sign a letter to your library protesting a book and have that be it's a public library, so it's a public discussion. If you're not willing to like put your name on it and say, hey, I believe this, and then have other people react to whatever it is you believe publicly, right, it seems to me that you should be taken serious.
Right.
It's just like, we don't have to think about what you just said because you're not willing to stand up for it. You're not willing to say, I believe that, no Native books should be included, or I believe that you should make sure that, the homosexuals are presented in a dark light, so to
No,
speak.
no.
It's
Well,
like,
I
if you're
mean,
not
but
willing to say that publicly and let us know who you are,
yeah. Well,
is
I
it
mean,
even a thing?
in the case though of elected officials, we have plenty of them that are willing to go on record, right? They have come up with lists of books that they want banned, and they've passed legislation. And so again, I come back to, okay, but as a community, again, let's think about our children, and let's think about, the future that they are going to have, right? It's not about just us today. It's about them sustaining, our species into the future, and working together, knowing about each other is going to accomplish that, versus saying, well, we're just going to ignore these large swaths of our population. And for those who are disturbed, about the change in demographics, which has been happening now over time.
Sure.
I want to go, we just mirror the rest of the world. What is the deal? We just mirror the rest of the world now. Like, we're finally back in the mix.
Sure. Well, I think they've been upset for this time too, for a long time. And it's just that people are gaining momentum. But to your point about the politicians, I also think that they should publish the letters to people who write them and who called them up. And I think that should be a public discussion. In addition to which, I think when those politicians put out those kind of statements, it's up to us also to publicly react to them, because this is a public discussion. It's not a private discussion,
Right.
At least from my point of view.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is going to have to involve an engaged public, at all ages, all backgrounds, because otherwise we'll just continue to see this become the norm. And I would love to see it as very isolated. And we're not there right now.
That's right. Well, but I think the fact that we're having this discussion says at least there are some people on board to say, okay, we should be having this discussion.
Yeah.
Now let's turn to maybe what can we as citizens do to help support bringing these conversations to our living rooms, to our coffee houses, to our public forums. What kinds of things can you imagine that each of us could be doing at an individual level, that one that doesn't require having a Robert's Rules of Order or anything like that? Just do it to make it normal.
Yeah. It's, to me, it's easier than ever now with social media to see who is publishing books in children's literature, right? And what young people are interested in reading, and making sure your local library has those books. Talking to your local elementary and middle and high schools and saying, hey, how is your funding looking? Like, they're always fundraising, right, for supplies and things, but how's your library? If I got a group of people together and we chipped in some money, like, where are the holes in your library and your collections around, BIPOC, LGBTQIA plus representation? We know there's new books that are award-winning coming out all the time, and how can we help, right? Certainly book clubs, programs at your library that feature these books, go to those, make sure young people know about them. And the South Dakota Festival of Books, they're bringing in wonderful people. That is a wonderful way for those of you in South Dakota to engage and support. I am super excited to spend 2 days with young people in Sioux Falls, and then also in Brookings, talking about books and my work, and encouraging them to be their own storytellers. One of the things that anyone can do in their own households is to provide, encouragement and support to, the children around them, whether they're related to them or not, to develop their own storytelling skills, whether that's through art, the written word, film, song, whatever it is. We are all made up of story. That's how we make sense of our lives, right? From the time we're born until we transition out of this life. And So there's so much richness there. And why would we not want to have our young people encouraged, right, to share their stories and to be able to look to what is being done, and shared now in the world, which, I mean, I'm jealous. I tell young people this all the time. I said, I'm so grateful that I found this career and I get to read the books that you're reading, because I can tell you right now, children's literature was not as dynamic when I was your age. And we did not even have a young adult category. There were so few books. You kind of just went from some early chapter books and you just started reading adult novels. Like the stuff that they have now to read, and the artwork, the quality of the artwork, you could never afford to buy the paintings, right, that are in these books. It's unfathomable. So giving young people access to that and encouraging them to share their own stories in whatever way and to use those gifts and abilities. I mean, all of our lives are enriched when we're engaged in the creative. Whether that's what they do for a living or not, it doesn't matter. It is something that nourishes your soul. And so you can start on a very local level that way, right? Just helping to, connect young people with books in your homes, in your neighborhood, through your public library, through schools. Those are ways. And like I say, I mean, certainly, calling out those, politicians or whatever they're doing those things, but really just, I feel like starting local, is the best. And that's kind of from your house and in concentric circles outward from there.
Sure. I want to open it up again to our panelists here. If anybody has any comments, questions, insights for Traci?
Yes, please. I would love to
Just
answer your questions.
getting your thoughts together.
Yeah. And also about any books that I've written or what's on the way, whatever
sure.
you're interested in.
Sure. Well, I have more questions. So I just want to make sure that I'm not hogging all the time here and
I appreciate that.
Giving other people a chance to contribute to this interactive
Yes.
process.
I have to do a shout out to Lindsay Metcalf, who is on. She is a fellow Kidlit author based in North Central Kansas, and just a wonderful nonfiction writer. So I'm happy to see her here. Hey, Lindsay.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay, for joining in. Now, what kind of books does Lindsay write?
She has written a number of wonderful books. One of them is a biography of Beatrice Potter, but before she had anything to do with Peter Rabbit. So this is her life as a scientist and researching fungi, mushrooms, and how, that may have been her career path, right? If she had not run into an all-male scientific society there in London that kept her research and work from being shared more broadly. So, it's a fascinating look on kind of a beloved children's book author that I had no knowledge about. She's also written one on the 70s. Again, something that happened like when I was younger. I had no idea this was going on, that there were these tractorcades that drove tractors out to Washington, D.C. to protest farm prices and farmers not being able to make a living. And so their activism, and lots of wonderful archival photos in that book. She's also put together a couple of anthologies of poetry around young people who are activists in a variety of fields. And so one of those is No World Too Small, or No World Too Big, and the other one is No Voice Too Small. And so I've contributed poems to both of those. So she's doing wonderful work,
Great.
for young people.
Lovely to see you here, and lovely to know that you're doing books.
Yeah.
I want to switch over to how many books that focus on Native themes written by Native people. What are we talking? Are we talking about 100% increase because there's 2 now, but there were 1 last year, or what? How many books are we talking about? And where are these books? Where can these books be found?
So there's still plenty of books coming in between the trade side and the educational market side that are being created by non-native people about native subjects. And so those often are very problematic. They're not, I got one the other day. So I was like, oh, it's a book on Sequoia, who invented the Cherokee syllabary, which is our written language that he came up with symbols for and what we use now for writing. It was horrible. I said, no, this is stuff that if I was using Google, I could easily find the answers to, and this person, did not do any of that. So there's that in the marketplace. But what you find is we still have maybe 50 books that come out a year. And I'm counting like books from Canada and the United States. So because some of those books are relevant to, what we're doing here as well. So it's not a lot. It really is not a lot. But you can find them now from small, independent trade publishers to the big five. So like At the Mountain's Base, Penguin Random House. Penguin has a number of books coming out. Cynthia Leidick Smith, who's Muskogee Creek citizen that I mentioned earlier, she is an author curator for an imprint at HarperCollins called Heart Drum. So, and they launched in 2020. So there's a number of books from picture books to YA coming from that imprint. Charles Bridge, which published We Are Grateful, We Are Still Here, and my latest book, Powwow Day, they have a number of Native and other BIPOC books that are available. So it's just a variety, which is lovely, and that's how it should be, and there are independent Native owned press like Black Bears and Blueberries, which is a tribally owned couple that are Ojibwe in northern Minnesota. They put out books. Of course, South Dakota Historical Society has put out picture books with by Native illustrators, S.D. Nelson, Greet the Dawn, one of my favorite picture books that he's written. The Minnesota Historical Society also publishes wonderful picture books. I don't know if I've seen any middle grade or young adult from them, but there's a variety now, and that's wonderful because there used to just be really a few previously and not so much, but now, like I say, Macmillan, you can find, that's where they produced We Are Water Protectors, which Kayla Goad, who's a Tlingit artist, won the Caldecott Medal for. That's the first time we've ever had an Indigenous person win the Caldecott. And I think she's the first BIPOC woman to win the Caldecott. So that was exciting. They also published Fry Bread by Kevin Millard, and then the huge young adult novel last year, Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Woolley, that is going to be made into a Netflix series. So, we're getting some traction here,
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
How can we build on that traction? How can we put momentum on it as individual citizens?
Again, like I say, just buy the books, request the books for the library. That's how trade publishing operates, right? It's on sales. Are those books moving? Then we will keep wanting more of those. If teachers are requesting books, librarians, if citizens are saying, where are these books? Certainly when you're at, like South Dakota Book Festival, going to those workshops with those writers, and that lets them know, what, we need to have more Native authors and illustrators that we're featuring at our festival. Those are all very easy things to do, for sure.
Sure. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is when we talk about these books, we often do talk about them in terms of trade publications, but there is a whole bunch of independent writers and publishers now that have just said, okay, you guys not going to write about us. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
We're going to do it ourselves. And the technology making that a thing is makes it more accessible often than sitting around sending out queries. How do those people get into the circle of writers about Native experiences?
I think in general for everyone, it's easier if you're writing for adults, right? Because adults are buying and accessing that content themselves. So if you're writing for young people don't buy the board books, right? That are birthed to age 3. They're not buying the picture books. They're not buying the novels, the graphic novels themselves. They, their discretionary income, if they have any, goes for other things. So it really is, you're reaching the adults. And what you find then is it is so much harder to get your book noticed. And in those distribution channels, especially with libraries, public libraries and schools, because they have distributors that they buy the books through. And so they will use those normal distribution companies like Ingram, Baker and Taylor, or they order directly from the publishers themselves. So if you are self-publishing, it is much harder for you to access and get your books in libraries, because people say to me, well, why don't you just publish them yourself? And I said, well, one, if I were to actually produce the books, I don't need my garage full of those things, and I'm having to handle the distribution. And you can do create and print and stuff, but the books that I do, as you can see behind me, to this point have largely been picture books. And I've got other books on the way that are longer in length, but they're very rich in art. And I could never afford to pay that illustrator myself, right? I mean, the publisher is buying my words. They're pairing me with an illustrator who's bringing their gifts and abilities to tell more than half of the story in a picture book. So I can't afford them. I'm so grateful though to have them, right, share with me the bookmaking experience. And the publisher is paying the editor. They're paying, the art director, the whole design team, all of that stuff. I don't have to take care of any of those things. And they can get it to any school, any library, any bookstore, anywhere in the world. And logistically, I would never get anything written if I had to do all that stuff. I mean, even I would say 10 years ago, we were not expected as people in this industry to be as accessible to the public as we are. So we are much more involved in the marketing than we ever would have been otherwise, right? It was like the book gets published and the company takes care of marketing that out to the world. Now we are much more involved in that process. So that's an added layer that takes away from my writing and research and creation time. So I don't want to do the other things, but just in terms of who our audience is, they can't buy the books themselves. So it's much harder to produce the book yourself and get them out to the adults, in essence, who are the gatekeepers that are providing that access to young people for the book. But
We
that's
have
a
a
great
couple.
question.
Yeah. Yes, if we have more time, I'd like to get under the hood of, like, not necessarily you, because I see exactly what you're saying, but those people who are doing it. But that could be for another whole program. There are some people who have some other questions or comments. Jace, who's she's a Lakota elder, and she talks about when she gives presentation, she brings examples of Native-oriented books to children, and she wants to thank you for your work in bringing the light of these books to all of us.
Oh, no, Jace, I appreciate that. I definitely always share slides when I present of other books that people can seek out besides mine. So I'm happy to hear that you're doing that too, because I think that we all need to be exposed to a broad swath of literature. So Wado.
Another comment, I think maybe from Facebook, was that adults also need to know what the current books are, because I mean, even though we talk about the libraries or the schools, I'm going to think that if adults would give some of these books as Christmas presents or birthday presents, that is going to even outdo the salesman that goes into the school, in terms of like getting books out there to people. So it's really that spreading of that. We have our own marketing networks. We just don't realize that we have those. Industry does. That's why they pay for ads on Facebook. You know, it's
Mhm.
because they realize that we influence each other more than their ads can do, you know?
Yeah.
That's why they have brand ambassadors now that have replaced a lot of people's advertising budgets, and they get a much better return on it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I appreciate Jane bringing that up because, you know, the knowledge that we grew up with, right, in terms of our curriculum, and most people were not Native American Studies majors in college, and you know those kinds of things. It's very limited, and so you know, reading books for young people about created by Native writers and illustrators gives you the ability to fill in those gaps. So that's absolutely, but I mean, that's about any group, right? Because that's where the innovation is. The books now are so much better than anything we read when younger, and even better than they were 10 years ago. So I always come back to, they asked, I don't know if it was Ken Jennings or who, there was a Jeopardy winner, and they asked him, you know, how is it that you prepared for this? And he said, I read books for young people, because it was the easiest way to get the knowledge distilled in, you know, a very succinct, you know, it's succinct type writing, right? I mean, it's very action oriented. There's not long paragraphs setting up a scene, or, you know, you're stuck in someone's head for pages. There's none of that, right? It's, you get into the story, the action, or the events, whatever it is. And so I think that's very true, Jane.
well, one last thing before
Mhm.
we have to tune out, because our time is up. What are the names of some books that you've written that you want us to know about?
Well, as you can see the ones behind me, but I mean, first I would
But
say
we
go to
can't
my
read 'em.
website. Oh, okay.
Okay.
But Traci Sorell, TraciSorell.com. I have a page for every single book I've written, and there's also the ones that are on the way. So we are grateful. Ojali Haliga is definitely my first book and probably what I'm most well known for. We are still here. I'll be talking about at the South Dakota Book Festival, as well as Classified, about Marigold Ross. Powwow Day. I know you have lots of powwows in South Dakota, as that's a huge part of the tradition of the Lakota and Dakota people up there. And that just came out in February. And it's about a young girl, River, who is at the powwow and recovering from a long illness and upset that she can't jingle dress dance like she normally can, but finds that, you know, family and community are very healing. And so I've heard from lots of people from lots of different backgrounds about how relevant that book is, even in light of COVID. And the funny part of that is, you know, I tell people that this industry moves at a glacial pace. That book was supposed to come out in 2020. I'm grateful it came out this year, because a lot of people really relate to that story. And I have a book coming out in October on Wilma Mankiller. It's a chapter book biography about the late Cherokee Nation chief, and who experienced relocation in the 1950s with her family from here to San Francisco. In the spring, a book about two Native baseball players who had very different journeys to meet against each other in the 1911 World Series. One who grew up on the reservation in what is now Southern California, out near Palm Springs, and one who came from northern Minnesota and grew up in the boarding schools in Pennsylvania, and met and played against each other.
With that, we have run out of time. I want to encourage everybody to go to the SDBookFestival.com. You'll see more information on that. And just as important, you'll see information about the book festival. Thanks everyone for showing up. See you next week on a brand new show. Hope I'll see all of you out at the book festival.
What